HAND stands for literally HIV-associated neurocognitive disorders, and indeed it's thought that the HAND disorders are the commonest cause of dementia in young adults globally. And I guess in a sense what the good news is that it is treatable, unlike say Alzheimer's disease or some of the other dementias that the community might be familiar with. We think about individuals who are HIV positive, where HIV has affected the brain, and that occurs in about 1 in 5 people with HIV whose immune system gets low enough to let HIV begin to cause damage in the brain. And when individuals have HAND, they may in fact be asymptomatic, which is the first category, asymptomatic neurocognitive impairment, where you have to be formally investigated to find it. The second category, minor neurocognitive disorder, that's where people do have symptoms. This is the proportion of people who do begin to notice that they're performing below par, both at work, let's say, and at home in their activities of daily living, but noticeable by themselves and certainly noticeable by the people around them, their lovers or carers or friends, whatever. And then the third category is HAD, is the short term for it, HIV-associated dementia. And this is a much more profound illness where individuals would not be able to work and they wouldn't be able to leave. You wouldn't be able to leave them to run a house or look after children or give older grandparents their medications, etc. They really would be impaired, and as I said, they wouldn't have a job. Thankfully, we very rarely see people with advanced HIV dementia these days. It is a spectrum, and evidence has gradually come about showing that it probably is a continuum. So you might have early asymptomatic illness, which can certainly progress to the milder form, and if untreated, that can progress.
The most common form of HAND these days that we would see is minor neurocognitive disorder. And people who experience that would sometimes report, apart from just forgetfulness, slowing in the way they process their thoughts, some difficulties in planning and organisation, forgetting appointments, just like a slowing down of their normal processes. And you know, it can be quite mild, it can be quite unnoticeable to other people. As a health professional going in to meet them for the first time, you might not really be noticeable, and you'll only notice over a few weeks of visits and getting to know them better that there is some deficit there.
When I first became aware that I was having problems intellectually or cognitively, I'd driven my car to pick up a friend, and I forgot to turn right at a certain place which I know very well. And I just kept driving until there were no landmarks that I recognised. And I also discovered at home that my fail-safe systems were breaking down. And that worried me because I'm on HIV medication and I didn't want to force a change of medication through non-compliance.
Individuals with more advanced HAND might notice things like they're clumsy, or they drop things, or they have some difficulty with fine movements such as signing a signature or doing up their buttons. They may in fact be still on the ball, where they know what the year is and the date is, different to Alzheimer's disease. But I think broadly individuals struggle a bit with being interrupted. If they're doing something, they might have to take a while to go back and find what they were once doing, and that can be challenging in an age where we're constantly interrupted and expected to be able to multitask.
My motivation to do things was lacking, and I physically wasn't able to do the housework. I couldn't manage the vacuum.
The population of people living with HIV is growing older. I think the average age is now in our mid-50s. And it's important not to confuse some of these serious consequences such as HAND with what might be more natural consequences of aging.
So HAND is diagnosed in an approach that's almost one of the toughest diagnostic approaches in medicine, where you exclude every other possible cause of the illness, and then you say, well, this very much must be HIV dementia. There's no single blood test or biomarker or single X-ray scan of the brain, for example. You have to build together a whole picture of different aspects of the individual's health before you can make the diagnosis. you take a detailed history and a physical examination. Then a really pivotal part of assessing a person to see if HIV is affecting their brain is neuropsychological testing. And the other thing in that scenario is just to check that things like diabetes, if the person's diabetic, that's under control. Make sure the person doesn't have high blood pressure or a major social, emotional, mood disorder, or that they're drinking a lot, because some of those factors may have some impact on their cognitive health. And then typically, ideally, one does a scan of the brain as well, just to exclude any other causes. Finally, depending on the circumstance, you may also draw some fluid through the spinal cord area known as a lumbar puncture. So you finally, after quite considerable workup, you would bring the patient back and evaluate all the findings and say, look, this really does look compatible with HIV having affected the brain, or in fact, you might say, look, it really looks like you're pretty depressed and you've got some anxiety, and we're going to refer you to the psychiatrist. And so you might go down another pathway with them.
I do feel that a diagnosis is vindicating, because you know something's wrong. Your friends will tell you it's this, your friends will tell you it's that, but it's not that. It's an organic change in the brain.
What we do know is one of the leading risk factors for developing HIV dementia is having a weakened immune system and lower CD4 T cells. Even as low as less than 350 CD4 cells can put you at greater risk for HIV dementia, and that risk gets even higher when your T cells are less than 200. But treatment seems to be the greatest prevention of dementia.
The difference with hand is that it is treatable, and people with HIV-related cognitive impairment, their cognitive function can improve markedly once they're on treatment and they're adherent to treatment.
If the person's never been put on HIV treatment or is currently not on any treatment, they might have stopped it. The best approach for treating HIV dementia is to treat the HIV and put them on the antiretroviral drugs. And in that setting, we typically would choose drugs that we know penetrate the brain well. There's some individuals where they're already on treatment and they come to you and it looks like HIV might affecting the brain, and you can't find evidence of HIV being uncontrolled in the blood, but you can look in the fluid that surrounds the brain, and if you find HIV is in fact active there, then we can switch treatments or add different treatments to control HIV in the brain then. And finally, and perhaps the most challenging situation, is when the individual is taking their medications well and there's no HIV detectable in the blood or in the fluid around the brain. In that case, you might add in some new antiretroviral agents that might just help a bit more in the brain, or you can switch their whole treatment regimen entirely and keep monitoring them. I think that's the key message, to stay in touch with the patient and keep evaluating them over 3, 6, 12 months. If you treat people for their HIV, you can have at least 50% of people will have remarkable recovery that extends and continues out into at least a year and a half. People continue to improve.
When I first started taking them, it was a very happy occasion because my parents were staying with me, and on the third day I didn't feel worse than the day before, and on the fourth day I felt better, and the fifth day I felt better than I had the previous day, and so it went just in an upwards trajectory, and I rehabilitated myself in 6 months and went back to work as a stevedore.
It's an important diagnosis to make. It's important for individuals to be aware of their cognitive problems, and indeed the HIV-affected communities, both in Australia and internationally, this is one of their greatest fears, in fact, developing dementia. And there's quite an awareness around it, but there's still stigma associated with it, just as there is stigma associated with many mental health issues and other dementias in the broader community. So it's a little bit tough. It's a tough illness, but I think when managed, people can do really well.